meeting of the Mercer Island Transportation Benefit District Board. Do we have a roll call?
Board Member Bruce Bassett.
Here.
Board Member Debbie Bertlin.
Here.
Board Member Jane Baum.
Here.
Board Member Mike Ciro.
Here.
Board Member Dan Grouse.
Here.
Board Member Joel Walks.
Here.
And Board Member Bruce Bassett. Excuse me, Benson Wong.
Here.
Twice.
This is the time for public appearances. I don't know if anybody wants to address the board. If you do, you have 3 minutes. I already sort of know the rules here.
Separate rules for the TBD?
All right, hang on.
Okay. Thank you, President Wong. Ira Appleman, 4436 Ferncroft Road. I object to this board's blatant attempt to hide from the public the costs associated with the Transportation Benefit District you voted to create over public opposition. As with the City Council, you should approve the payroll and payables at the beginning of each meeting on the consent calendar. That shows for all Islanders to see what the TBD is costing in overhead. The city is not allowed to make a gift of public funds to the Transportation Benefit District by covering indirect costs, supplies, or salaries because the TBD is supposed to be legally independent. You appear to be treating the TBD and the city as if they're the same entity, even though the written materials acknowledge they are not. The Transportation Benefit District was set up as a separate taxing district to provide collected funds to city transportation projects. That's a given. The TBD is responsible for its own expenses. If the city decides to cover TBD expenses, it must get something in return over the TBD collected funds that were going to the city projects anyway. The City Council and Transportation Benefit District should be open and honest with the public, treating the entities as legally independent and not hiding the expenses of the TBD in the city budget.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to address?
Are we being televised?
Yes.
Okay.
Tommy Mick, 6231 Ironcrest Way. Some comments tonight about the Transportation Benefits District and the Council's use of its proceeds. First, no $20 car tab fee should be necessary if you use our existing tax revenue budget properly. Second, any fees collected should be used to LiDAR assess the vulnerability of Ironcrest Way, East Mercer Way, and West Mercer Way for critical slide damage due to seismic events and develop an artery detour contingency plan. Third, no Transportation Benefit District fee should be wasted on ruining present street or road capacity, like with unnecessary useless lane-constraining islands or angle parking adding to 77th Avenue, or for adding more dangerous bike lanes on the island to attract yet more off-island bikers to dangerously clog our East Mercer Way and West Mercer Way arteries. Fourth, the island's level of service standard should be maintained at level C and not level D so as to properly and fairly be able to assess impact fees from both developers and Sound Transit's consequential island-related traffic revisions. And finally, as fifth, the stoplights in Ironcrest Way are unnecessarily wasting significant amounts of Islander time and energy, causing unnecessary pollution, excessively remaining long after pedestrians have already long crossed. Those lights should immediately be reset to go flashing red about 10 seconds after turning steady red, so as to allow traffic to proceed ahead when pedestrian crossing is obviously safely clear. The ridiculous present lengthy light timing is completely inappropriate, only serving to unnecessarily hold up traffic while completely stopped, idling, polluting, and wasting fuel for as many as 20 vehicles at a time long after any pedestrian has already crossed Allen Crest Way. This isn't rocket science and only requires some basic common sense. Even Bellevue has figured this out. Thank you.
Ralph?
Hi, Ralph Jorgensen, 8040 84th Avenue Southeast. I didn't really come prepared to speak to this. I was going to speak later tonight, but I thought I'd improvise here. I forwarded you all an email last week about impact fees, and a number of people, including myself, over the past 2 years have been talking about impact fees. And just a preliminary analysis looks like over the past 2 years we've missed an opportunity to collect maybe $1.5 million worth of impact fees. And that's what the average of the 30 cities, and given our housing prices, I would think it might be even more. We spent $1 million to install 2 traffic lights in the town center. I think that came out of the general fund. And over the past year, I've heard the council members discuss this, I think you call it a structural deficit in terms of trying to match revenues with expenses of the city. And during this discussion, I've never heard about reviewing the impact fees. And I've heard, but although during this process I've heard of, use it to just justify utility rate increases, creation of this transportation benefit district, cuts to our investment of parks and open spaces, potential cuts to youth and family services, and possibly I think you call it a levy-lid tax increase. And it seems like you've made this transportation benefit district kind of in a vacuum without considering impact fees. And given that we're missing out on $1.5 million or more of impact fees, or maybe $750,000 a year or $1 million a year in impact fees, shouldn't we forgo the transportation benefit district if it's only going to bring in $350,000 and we're going to get a surplus of $1 million if you install these impact fees? So thank you for considering that.
Thank you, Ralph. Anybody else who wants to address the board? That ends public appearances. The next order on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our November 17 meeting.
I move approval of the minutes of the Transportation Benefit District meeting of November 17th, 2014.
Is there a second?
Second. You've been wanting to do that.
It's been, approval of the minutes have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor? Okay. The minutes are approved. The next item on regular business is a discussion of various interlocal agreements that the district needs to...
Joe might have abstained on that.
I wasn't present for
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so there's one abstention. Thank you.
Good evening, Christina Shook, Assistant City Attorney. I'm the attorney for the Transportation Benefit District. So the purpose of tonight is to continue setting up the framework for the Transportation Benefit District, or TBD as I'll refer to it tonight. And as you know, the TBD was established. You've adopted governing documents, and you've elected officers. So to continue the process, and on the agenda tonight is to set up a framework for cooperation with other governmental entities, including the city, and then to adopt a material change policy. We have a very brief presentation. We'll just highlight some portions of the interlocal agreements and the material change policy, and if you have specific questions as I go along, please feel free to ask. So the first interlocal agreement before you is between the TBD and the city. So as you know, the TBD is an independent legal entity, but it has a unique relationship with the city. Obviously, it's the same governing body, and there are joint goals and objectives with the city. And the TBD is helping to fund transportation improvements, which is specifically defined in the RCW, that the city will then own. So the ILA, the interlocal agreement with the city, addresses things like staffing services, how overhead charges are being addressed, the ownership of transportation improvements, which just complies with the RCW, and insurance, for example.
Christina, can you help me understand what the RCW says an improvement is that limits the TBD to improvements?
I can, yes. So a transportation improvement is defined as, first of all, it must be consistent with an existing state, regional, or local transportation plan and necessitated by existing or reasonably foreseeable congestion levels. And it's also specifically defined as a project, which means highways of statewide significance, principal arterials of regional significance, high-capacity transportation, public transportation, or other transportation projects of regional or statewide significance.
So we have 22 miles of residential streets that are PCI'd 70 or below, and almost 6 miles of arterial streets that are PCI'd at level 70 or below. Are you saying the TBD funds can't be used for that, or can be used for that, for overlay of those residential arterial streets?
So we'd probably have to look at each one individually and just go through the criteria. I think the key piece here is statewide or regional significance. So if you could look at those streets and make an argument, this is of statewide or regional significance, or this is a principal arterial of regional significance, then I think we can fall under that transportation improvement definition.
I mean, residential streets are not, we stretch definition of a lot of things. I don't know how we'd be able to stretch a cul-de-sac needing overlay as a...
Step doesn't think so.
Right.
Arterials only.
What's that?
Arterials only. We don't think it applies to residential streets.
So the TBDs does not apply to residential overlay streets?
I don't see how you can make the case that it can.
Are arterials has statewide significance?
That's our understanding.
You could even back it up to regional significance. So principal arterials of regional significance.
East Mercer has regional significance?
I think you could argue that. The second interlocal before you is between the Transportation Benefit District and the Department of Licensing.
Christina, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we were going to the second.
Okay. That's okay.
Can you talk about Section 3.1? It's the allocation of expenses between the city and the TBD, and in particular, how are you folks actually allocating that? Are there timesheets, or how do you actually do that?
I'm going to ask the Finance Department to step in on this question.
We use an allocation model, the same model that we...
Maybe, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm so sorry. Francie Lake, Deputy Finance Director, and we use an allocation model to charge staff time out to the various places that our overhead departments support. So it's the Finance Department, City Attorney, City Clerk's Office, and currently all of our time is allocated somewhat out to the street fund. So this, the TBD would just be within that allocation to street-related activities, but it would be separately accounted for. I'm not sure if that's answering your question. Looks like not.
Could you comment about the extent to which our structure is similar or different from other cities that have also implemented TBDs, such as the relationship to the city financing, ownership of improvements, etc.?
This is very similar to what other cities have done. In fact, from our research, it looks like all the cities I've looked at have used the standard interlocal agreement. There's a little bit of modification, just citywide, city-specific, but it is a standard agreement.
Can you give us the name of some of those cities, just for general reference?
Edmonds, Linwood, Olympia, Tacoma. Those are the ones I've looked at specifically.
Great, thanks.
Section 3.3, immediately alert the TBD of any material changes in scope, schedule, or cost increases of 20% or greater to improvements funded in part or whole with the TBD funds. Is the 20% standard? I mean, we're talking about a $70,000 swing in the expenses involved.
And what that comes from, 3.4, is, and you'll recognize it as we move on through this evening, is to comply with the material change policy, which is set out in the RCW. And that 20% is a number that the RCW sets forth. So what this does, this section, is it makes sure the city complies with this material change policy as well. So Section 3, its umbrella is what is the city obligated to do. So this ILA, this interlocal agreement, specifies the city has to comply with, puts the city on notice for the material change policy threshold as well. Does that answer?
My question relates to this material change policy. Material change to cost, there's a fixed amount, 20%. Material change to schedule is 90 days. I mean, it's giving leeway. But material change to scope has no concrete measure. And I'm wondering, is that just an arbitrary? I mean, any change in scope would be subject to alerting the TBD? Any change?
I think the key word there is material, which isn't defined in the statute, hopefully, but I think what
very vague.
It can be vague, but I think it means significant. It means major. If you look at the language of the RCW, it does use the terminology major plan change. And so that's how I would interpret material, is to consider that a major change in scope, for example.
If we have other questions on the major policy, maybe we can wait until we get to there. Okay. So are there any other questions regarding this particular ILA? Okay. Why don't you go ahead and talk about the next one?
Okay. The second ILA is with the Department of Licensing. As you probably know, the Department of Licensing administers and collects the $20 vehicle license fee. They have developed a standard interlocal agreement. I think it's the first TBD came in existence in 2009. They've standardized this agreement. What it addresses is the kind of key highlights are there is a 1% administrative fee that's deducted from the top, which DLL uses, and it outlines the Department of Licensing's responsibilities and the city and the TBD's responsibilities. Some of them do not seem particularly applicable to Mercer Island. For example, there's a lot about disputing of boundaries of the TBD, which I don't think will come into play often here. But the prime examples also are the TBD is the primary contact point for citizens, and then the DOL is kind of behind the scenes. They collect it. So if you have any questions on that agreement, we can address those now. And the third one is between the TBD and the Washington City's Insurance Authority, which is WCIA for short, basically the insurance pool that the city also uses. So again, the TBD as a separate legal entity needs its own insurance, for example, for defense costs or liability. And WCIA has accepted the TBD into its pool and has a standard agreement for the city, for the TBD, to sign. And the other piece of that is to choose delegates. So each member selects a delegate and alternate to WCIA. They suggest, and staff recommends this as well, that they use the same delegate and alternate that the city does, just to be more efficient. Currently, that's Noel Treat, the city manager, and Katie Knight, the city attorney. And so this is just summing up a few actions for tonight to adopt the 3 interlocal agreements that we discussed with the city, with the Department of Licensing, with WCIA, and then to appoint a delegate and alternate to WCIA. And then now Francie will talk about the material change policy.
So again, for the record, Francie Lake, Deputy Finance Director. The material change policy is required in the Transportation Benefit District, RCW, and as Christina said, it addresses major plan changes that affect project delivery or the ability to finance the plan. It's needed to address material changes to the project's cost and scope or schedule, and defines what will require a public hearing and or the board involvement. It addresses the level of change to a project that will require action, so a cost change to a project in excess of 20% of the adopted budget would require a public hearing to solicit public comment, and that is directly per the RCW. I think, as you know, if something happens with a project, we would be communicating as a board, staff would be communicating at a level below that, but for compliance with the RCW, it's in excess of 20%. And then for scope changes that are beyond that originally, the scope originally anticipated in a project, or for schedule changes which impact another project or in excess of 90 days, that would prompt a review of changes by staff with the board president, and then the board president would determine whether to convene a board meeting for discussion.
Are the scope changes regarding time and material scope, is it statutory as well? Is that in the RCW?
The RCW requires us to address cost, scope, and schedule. The only place where it gets specific is on cost. So in terms of scope and schedule, we have, again, looked at about 15 other TBDs and have aligned ourselves with what others are doing. So just before you tonight is the material change policy for your adoption. If you have other questions. Okay.
Okay, so let's go back then. I guess there's a number of things that we have to consider adopting. So I would entertain a motion to adopt the ILA between the City of Mercer Island and the TBD.
Mr. President, I move to adopt the interlocal agreement with the City of Mercer Island to provide staff services.
Second.
Any Joel? Yeah.
I have two scriveners on page 1. The second whereas, there's a comma between reconstruct and public that is not necessary. And on the fifth whereas, there's an additional indentation that's not necessary to fulfill the intent of ordinance no return, 14C-11.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Mike?
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wong. President Wong, just kind of for the record, I've not supported the TBD, and I'll not support or not vote for any of these motions, which are somewhat administrative in nature. You know, it's kind of, it's a lot of money that we're talking about here. Ralph Jorgensen spoke eloquently about it not being necessary. I suppose if I talk to the finance director, assistant city manager Quarter, he'd tell me there's probably been $300,000 in additional revenue since we adopted the TBD, and it's not so much need of revenue as it is appetite of projects, and we need to balance our budget on the side of expenses, not the side of revenue, because we kind of talk as if revenue is something other than taking money out of folks' pocket. And it's very disturbing that this TBD, I'm sure many folks out there think that the TBD will be used to maintain, repair our streets with overlays, and we can't even do it for residential streets. Now, to think that this will free up monies from a different silo to go into residential streets, that's to be determined. But those are the reasons I'll not support any of these motions.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the interlocal agreement with the Department of Licensing.
Mr. President, move to adopt the interlocal agreement with the Department of Licensing for the collection of vehicle license fees.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the interlocal agreement with the Washington City's Insurance Authority.
I move to adopt the interlocal agreement with the Washington City's Insurance Authority for errors, omissions, and liability insurance.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
And last on the agenda is to well, actually, I'm sorry, there's a few more things. We need to appoint a delegate and an alternate to the Washington City's Insurance Authority. We've heard from staff that they recommend that the delegate and the alternate that represent the city, Noel and Katie, be appointed the delegate and alternate delegate for the Transportation Benefit District.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
I don't remember us doing that for the city. I don't think since Noel, you came on board, we never officially appointed you. Is this something we have to do? I mean, is there, if so, then do we have to also do something for the city, or how does that work?
We don't have to do it for the city. It's a little different with the TBD. We looked at the scope of, one thought was to have the president appoint them, but I looked at the scope of the bylaws, and that could be a liberal reading of it, so we thought a easier way, a cleaner way would just be to bring it to the full board.
So in this, are we asked to not just say that we want a delegate and an alternate, but to name those people as
Correct.
part of this motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. And staff's recommendation as to who to name?
Noel and Katie.
Okay. So I move to appoint Noel as our delegate, Noel Treat as our delegate, and Katie Knight as our alternate to the Washington City's Insurance Authority full board.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I mean, I can't oppose that.
Give us one.
Mr. President, move to adopt the Mercer Island Transportation Benefit District Material Change Policy.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. Okay, motion passed. I believe that's the end of our regular business. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.